Hello and welcome to another deck guide. Today I'll be covering Enchanter's Arsenal, the green and white enchantment deck that was part of deck pack number 2, so let's get right into it. First card on our list is Evolving Wilds, and the reason we're including this card is because we have a couple pretty color intensive cards in our deck that require either green and white in their casting cost, or double green or double white. So it's nice to have the Evolving Wilds to fetch the lands you need, and the deck isn't very fast, so it's okay to spend your first turn grabbing a land with Evolving Wilds, because we don't have a ton of 1-drops that we want to play on the early turns, and even in the later game, because as you'll see the curve is pretty stacked at number 3, and we have few 4-drops, so even on turn 4 we can just cast a 3-drop and then fetch a land with the Evolving Wilds. So another reason to include Evolving Wilds is a card I'll mention a little later, but first let's go to the next card, which is Ethereal Armor, a cheap aura to put on your creatures, and it gives +1/+1 for each enchantment you control, and also gives first strike. As you'll see, we don't have a ton of creatures in the deck, which is one of the weaknesses of the deck, but this Ethereal Armor can get pretty big pretty quickly. It obviously also includes itself and also the many removal spells in the deck, because most of them are enchantments, so you can count on Ethereal Armor at least giving +3/+3 on average, and sometimes it can even get much bigger than that. So a very powerful card, and often if you have a draw engine on the battlefield, it will just replace itself because you'll get to draw a card. Let's go to the next card, which is Rancor, an all-time favorite. Gives +2/+0 and trample, and when Rancor is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you can return it to your hand. So make sure that Rancor does resolve, because if they kill the creature you're about to enchant in response, then Rancor doesn't go to your hand, and you don't want that to happen. Rancor is also really good because it gives your creature a form of evasion, and some of your creatures have difficulty getting through otherwise, so it's a nice ability to have. And again, it often replaces itself with your many draw engines. Next on our list is Qasali Pridemage, which might seem a little out of place at first sight, but it actually does have a role in the deck, because it's an early body you can enchant with your auras, and the 2/2 Exalted is pretty nice. And also the ability to destroy artifacts or enchantments does come up more than you would think, so not a bad card. And as you see, the creature count is pretty low, so it's just nice to have some efficient creatures you can enchant. Next up is Argothian Enchantress, one of the many enchantresses in the deck, and this one will get to draw you a ton of cards if you get her out early. It has Shroud, so it's protected against removal. It's a little unfortunate that it isn't hexproof, because that means you can't enchant her and start attacking, but it is a creature, so if you really have to, you can always block. And yeah, not a bad card at a low cost of 1 and a green. This deck can have trouble with early aggression, so Wall of Blossoms is a perfect way to stop that while also drawing you a card, and who doesn't love drawing cards? Need I say more? Next up is Stirling Grove. Unfortunately they only gave us one, but it's a very good card in this deck, because not only is it an enchantment itself, but it can also look for other enchantments you need in certain situations. And it's also nice that you can split it up into 2 and 1, so you don't have to use it and activate it in the same turn. And it can also stay on the battlefield for a while if you need an extra enchantment for cards like Ethereal Armor or Yavimaya Enchantress, which I'll get to in just a second. As I mentioned earlier, this deck can have some trouble with early aggression, so Spirit Loop, giving your creature lifelink, is a nice way to recoup the loss of life, and in the late game it can put you out of reach. And also, like Rancor, when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, it is returned to your hand, so you can keep it going. Now we finally arrive to our removal spells, and you can't go wrong with Pacifism, because it's also an enchantment, so it has a ton of synergy with your cards, triggering them and giving you an extra enchantment on the battlefield, so great card. Journey to Nowhere is arguably better than Pacifism, because it also disables activated abilities from being activated. It can outright kill tokens, and it does some other things as well. The downside being if your opponent does remove it and the creature had some sort of enter the battlefield effect, then it will trigger again, but it's obviously still an auto include. Eternal Witness is another one of those cards that seems a little out of place, but it does have some synergy in the deck, because not only does it get back cards like Stirling Grove after you've activated them, but it can also return your Evolving Wilds, so that's the combo I mentioned earlier. And as you've seen, the deck doesn't have a ton of creatures, so if you're playing against a deck with a ton of removal, then it's a nice way to get back some threats so you don't run out of them. Next up is Yavimaya Enchantress. This is the main win condition in the deck, getting +1/+1 for each enchantment on the battlefield. So unlike Ethereal Armor, this does count the opponent's enchantments as well. And we do have 4 of them, so with all the card draw we have in the deck, it's pretty likely you'll see one of them. So a very good card indeed. Shackles is a great card in this deck. It might seem like a bad pacifism at first, but let me assure you it is not. It has a ton of uses, because you can return it to your hand, so you can keep triggering effects that draw you cards or that generate you other types of advantages whenever you cast an enchantment. And if you really have to, you can always use it like a simple removal spell, but in the late game this is a winner. Enchantress's Presence is the other draw engine in the deck, giving you another card whenever you cast an enchantment, and the advantage over the other Enchantress is that it is an enchantment itself, so it will trigger other effects that require enchantments, and it will stay on the battlefield, giving an extra enchantment for the Yavimaya Enchantresses, and it is tutorable with the Stirling Grove, so that's another bonus. In a metagame full of monocolored decks, Opal Titan reigns supreme, so whenever your opponent casts a creature, Opal Titan becomes a 4/4 giant with protection from that creature's colors. Let me refresh real quick what protection does. It prevents damage from sources with the given color. It prevents being enchanted by or equipped by a permanent with the given color. It prevents being blocked by a creature with the given color. And it prevents targeting from spells with the given color. The only drawback of this card is that you're giving your opponent a choice whether or not he wants to activate the Opal Titan, but that's a pretty small drawback considering the upside of this card. Faith's Fetters rounds out the removal for this deck. Not only does it gain you some life, but it also prevents activated abilities from being activated. You can also enchant any permanent with this, so that does include lands like Eye of Ugin, so you can stop your opponent from searching up Eldrazi every turn, so a very versatile card. I'm currently running 1 Lucent Liminid, and no, it's not a bug, this is indeed an enchantment creature, so it will trigger all those cards that require enchantments, and you can also search it up with Stirling Grove if you need a creature, and it also has some nice evasion that this deck is lacking a bit. Oversoul of Dusk is a very good card, especially if your opponent's running mono blue, mono black, mono red, or any combination of those colors. If your opponent's running green and or white, then Oversoul becomes a little poopy, but still it's a great card to include, and it's another much needed creature in the deck. Sigil of the Empty Throne is the best finisher in the deck, as it will generate a 4/4 angel token whenever you cast an enchantment. You will often tutor this with Stirling Grove in the late game, and in combination with cards like Shackles, you can keep generating angel tokens without needing many tools, so great card. I'm also including 2 Gigantiforms in the deck, as they give your creatures another form of evasion. They also work nicely with the Yavimaya Enchantress, because they become 8/8, have trample, but they will still get +1/+1 for each enchantment on the battlefield. So another great card, and if you happen to kick this, then you will probably win the game on the spot. Alright, this concludes the main deck. Now I'll go over the cards that didn't make it and try to explain why. Oracle of Nectars is not a bad magic card, and it could theoretically help out with the early aggression, but the reality is that you won't be blocking with this in the early game, and in the early game you'll also be spending your mana trying to cast other stuff, and in the late game when you have a lot of mana available, you would rather spend it on cards like Shackles so you can keep returning it and playing it to trigger all sorts of stuff. So just activating an Oracle is pretty difficult, so it's not worth the inclusion. Privileged Position is a nice card to try and protect your creatures from removal, but it's a little clunky as it comes into play pretty late, so your opponent can just use his removal spells in response and kill your creatures. And it doesn't protect against most sweepers, so it just doesn't do enough, and it's a little too slow, so it didn't make the deck for me. And Daybreak Coronet is a great card once you get it going, but the problem is getting it going, because there aren't as many auras as in the white enchantment deck, and the odds of getting a 3-for-1 are just very high, so you would rather not risk it. Mobilization is just a little slow. In the late game you would rather spend your mana doing other stuff, and we don't really have a token strategy going, so I will pass on this. Idyllic Tutor fills the same role as a Stirling Grove, the advantage here being that you can put the enchantment directly into your hand instead of on top of your library. The disadvantage being that it's not an enchantment, so it won't trigger anything, and it's also costing 3 mana, so you can't ration it out during several turns. False Prophet provides a sweeper effect in the deck, and the problem is that you don't really want a sweeper, because you would rather have those pacifisms to stay on the battlefield for a while, and this would also kill your Shrouded Enchantress. So it's also up to the opponent whenever he wants to make the False Prophet die. So just a bit of a clunky card, and it doesn't synergize very well with your other cards. Leyline of Sanctity might be a giant trump card against Dodge and Burn, but in most other matchups this won't be doing enough for you, so it's not really worth the inclusion. I can't think of a situation where Ivory Mask wouldn't be worse than a Leyline of Sanctity, so this is definitely not worth including. Martial Anthem is not a bad magic card either, the problem being that we don't really have enough creatures to fully take advantage of this effect, so I'll pass on it for now. The same logic applies here, as the amount of creatures hasn't changed, so just not enough creatures to get this going. I'm going to sound a little repetitive here, but we still don't have enough creatures to fully take advantage of these types of cards, and same goes for Celestial Ancient. Although you look pretty cool, I'm sorry, but you're not gonna make it into the deck. In the matchups where you really need to gain that life quickly, Angelic Chorus is gonna be too slow for you, so you would rather use another card to try and gain the life earlier, and otherwise there are better cards to gain life back in the late game. This is just too expensive. You don't really have enough creatures to make Martyr's Bond work, and most cards you have are enchantments. Your opponent probably doesn't have a ton of those, and enchantments also don't die very often, so taking advantage of this card requires a lot of work, and I simply don't think it's worth the effort. Open the Vaults can probably enable some crazy combos involving Eternal Witness, it just doesn't do enough for the streamlined version. While Hidden Gibbons has a nice ring to it, and it's cheap to get into play, it's not very reliable as not every deck plays a lot of instants, so you won't be seeing that 4/4 ape very often. It might seem a little weird that we're not running Verduran Enchantress, but the reason is simply that we already have enough draw engines in the deck, and you don't want to have too many of them, because then you're left with a bunch of cards that don't impact the board. She can be enchanted by auras, but she can also die to removal unlike the other Enchantress, and she's also more expensive. Endless Worm is difficult to get going, and if it does eventually die, you're probably left with an empty board, so I wouldn't advise running it. We already have 2 Gigantiforms in the main deck, so we can already use the Kicker ability, so the third one seemed a little much as we are a bit creature light, as mentioned a couple times in this video already. Did I already mention that we don't have a ton of creatures in the deck? I think I did. Primal Rage gives your Yavimaya Enchantress trample, which is relevant, but other than that they don't really have a lot of uses, and you would rather have a card that impacts the board. Lure seems a little ambitious, and if you combine it with Oversoul of Dusk it's not very good, because if your opponent has one of those colors then they won't be able to block regardless, so I'll skip on this. Centaur Safeguard would be a nice inclusion to try and combat those early aggressive decks, but unfortunately our 3-drop slot is pretty stacked already, so I couldn't find a spot for him. Auramancer is probably just worse than Eternal Witness in this deck. While it's nice to have one of them, Lucent Liminid is expensive and it's not very big for its cost, so I'll stick to one copy for now. Hidden Spider is probably the most conditional of these types of enchantments, but if your opponent is running early aggressive flyers, then this obviously becomes very good. So while it is a very good sideboard card, I wouldn't advise running it in your main deck, because it's still pretty narrow. And then finally we have this card that I'm not gonna try and pronounce. While it does combine nicely with Qasali Pridemage, as you can sacrifice them targeting this to draw 2 cards, then you're doing a lot of effort just to draw cards, while there are other much easier ways to draw them, so no thanks. Alright, this will conclude this deck guide. Feel free to leave suggestions in the comments below for my next deck guide, but for now I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.